Well, all right. I think it's about time to go ahead and get started. If you haven't already, you may want to turn your Bibles to Genesis 17. Of course, notice Larson's not here. That's a big void, but fortunately, I got some good help here. Actually, he was just telling me that he really invites challenging questions in this class. He really wanted some challenging questions, so.
Yeah.
No, but I really appreciate Austin helping out because after working with Larson, I feel pretty inadequate trying to do it by myself anymore.
He can dish him out.
Yes, yes. Larson is never at a loss of words, but I mean his knowledge level, he brings a lot to the table. So he is a big void to try to replace when he is absent. But I think Austin and myself are up to the challenge.
Well, I said I'd probably speak half as much and it'd be half as good. So,
in way of review, we've seen from the very beginning that God created the heavens and the earth. And how did he describe it when he evaluated it? It was good. And then he created man. And how did he evaluate man? Very good. So all his creation was good. But what made man? What separated man? What made him very good? Made in God's image. So everything was great and perfect from the very beginning. But God gave man boundaries. And in what way did he give them boundaries?
Everything in the garden except one tree that they could not eat or touch it, for the day that they eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they would surely die.
Yes. So he set those boundaries and man breaks those boundaries. And now we have sin in the world. And the consequences of sin, certainly there are immediate consequences. We see man being cast from the garden. They're removed from that paradise there on earth. But also we see consequences such as, work will become very intense from this point on. Man will sweat and he will, work will become difficult, whereas it seems that it was more of a pleasure, a joy from the very beginning. What about the woman? What was one of her consequences?
Childbirth.
Yes.
That she would be subject to her husband, that he would rule over.
Very good. So she would suffer intense pain through childbirth, and also, if it wasn't already established from the beginning, just based upon woman being created for man, here God reemphasizes that she would be subject to her husband after this. So we see sin entered the world, and from that point forward, it really starts to snowball and get worse, whether it's through Cain or as we follow his lineage, things get really bad. The word God decides to just, he is sorry he even created man. And so he brings judgment upon the world. In what form did he do that?
Flood. A lot of people says, well, he destroyed all mankind except Noah. But he gave them 100 and something years that Noah preached to them to repent, and they chose not to repent.
That's right.
And there's no way that you can hold anything that God's not a just God and a righteous God, because he was even long suffering back then when everybody just said every thought was wicked.
Right.
But he still told them, if you would repent, they got to come in the boat too.
Yep. So, like you said, the world was judged based upon their own works, their own actions. Plenty of opportunity, but man proves himself worthy of judgment other than 8 souls, Noah and his family. So the rest of the world found judgment in the flood. What did they find in the flood? Salvation. You see the contrast there. That's interesting, depending on what perspective you're coming from, what you find in the flood. Most of us, we always think of the flood as an instrument of judgment, but for them it was right. It was a salvation. Yeah, yeah. And it does replicate judgment for us as well. For some people, it's going to be bad. For others, leaving this life is going to be a joy. It's going to be a release of all the burdens we'll get to leave behind, and we'll move forward into paradise. So after that, mankind starts over, but again, we see the same scenario kind of playing out, where people continue to turn to wickedness. There are still some that are calling upon the name of the Lord, but far and away, more of them are pursuing wickedness. And we get to chapter 11, and where we focus our efforts, the narrative, into focusing on one family, and that is the family of Abram. Where is Abram from? Ur of the Chaldees. Now, this man, we don't know much about his history other than him, his father, his wife, and his nephew being called out. God calls them out of Ur of the Chaldees and calls them to a land that he's going to give them. And so by faith, Abram, as well as his father and his family, they leave and they go to Canaan. But along the way, we see that Terah dies in the land of Haran. And we see that, well, we'll see later on that there may be other family that is established in that region as the story progresses. But Abram arrives in the land of Canaan, and we see immediately how God blesses Abram. In what ways would you say God blesses Abram? Yeah, prosperity. We see him with a lot of possessions. We see him establish a good name there in the land in a short period of time. God is blessing this man. We see him he's very aged at this point in time. I think he's 75 when he comes into the land, and yet he has a very sharpness, a clarity. We see him assemble a force to go after Lot when he got into trouble with the kings of Mesopotamia. So Abram has been very blessed up to this point in time. And
one thing that we kind of take out of context being his age, when even when he's in the 70s and 80s, we relate to people today in their 70s and 80s that they're not as strong as they was when they were young. But you take back during Abram's days, and men actually lived in their hundreds, not just 800, but
right,
200 or 300 years old.
right,
So when you would probably be 100, if you lived to 3, you would probably be like a person today in their 30s of strength and vitality and everybody. So I'm thinking that during that time of the human race, mankind was like more stronger, more able to do stuff because their length of time of their aging was different than our aging time.
Yeah, I think you'd have to assume that it would be that way, no question. But regardless, I mean, he's still an older man. Even in, as it's written throughout Scripture, the Bible terms it as him being an older man as well as his wife, yeah, Sarah being older. So, but he does have the vitality, as you're saying. He does have good vitality. But there is a promise that God has given Abram that he has not seen, that he's really looking forward to. What is that? A child, yes. So what does he do to try to, God has repeated this promise multiple times, and yet at this point in time, he's been in the land for some 10 years. What does Abram try to do, or should I say even Sarah? What did they try to do to hurry this process up?
To actually be his concubine and be marrying a child.
Yes, and so they follow this out. Sarah gives him her handmaid as wife, and he bears a child. What did they name the son? Ishmael. Now, things go bad with this. We see conflict between Hagar and Sarah. And as we move forward, we're going to see even more conflict within the siblings. But was this God's plan? It was not God's plan. So,
He's actually going to use what's there on Abraham's part of his descendants. So he's not going to bless him like his son from Sarah.
yeah, he's Ishmael will be blessed again, like you said, not to the level of the promised son, but he will be blessed. And then when we get to chapter 17, we see God change Abraham's name in the first 8 verses. He goes from, or Abram's name, he goes from Abram to Abraham. Now, Abe is father, Ram is exalted. So that's what his name has been, Father exalted. Has God exalted him? He has exalted him, but he still hasn't become a father per se. Now he changes his name to Abraham, which is Father Multitude. So now the promise, certainly the promise is ringing loud within Abraham's ears of, okay, for there to be a multitude, we've got to get this process going. And so, but God promises him that he is going to have a son. He is going to establish his covenant with not only Abraham, but also with his descendants after him. Austin, you got anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, maybe a couple things. So the first thing is that as we've gone through everything we just talked about, one thing we see is that man is capable of good and man is capable of evil, right? And sometimes really great evil. Would you say at this point, just by numbers, will we have had more good people or evil people? Probably more evil, right? I mean, I would say that's a good guess. I think we're going to see that again in what either we're going to be able to cover tonight or next time. The other thing is, and this is again maybe going to lead in toward the end, but kind of recently with dealing with Abraham, we know that he had a family member named Lot, right? Lot and Abraham, or Abram at that point, the ones they were in charge of weren't getting along and they had to pick paths, right? The only reason I'm bringing that up is because the path that each of them picked may have affected their future. And we may see that tonight as well. But that's pretty much it.
Very good. Anyone else got anything? All right, if not, we'll go ahead and charge right in. Begin with verse 9 of chapter 17. And God said to Abraham, "As for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and that shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offspring. Both he who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised. So shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin shall be cut off from among his people. He has broken my covenant." So we see that God has established a covenant with Abraham in the past. This is not the first time, but now he's given more of an external sign of this covenant. What is that? Circumcision of the males. How old are they to be? 8 days old. And
From here on out.
from here on,
Yeah.
obviously Abraham is 99 at this point in time, but we're moving from this point forward, all those that are born naturally, they will bear the circumcision. And so what is this about? What is this circumcision about? What's the idea behind this?
By their promise to God.
Yeah, exactly. You think about it, and so what does an 8-year-old male, what does he know about God? He knows nothing about God, does he? So this is not only just a sign for that 8-day-old male, but this is a responsibility that falls on the parents. This is a responsibility that falls upon the family. This is a responsibility that falls on the neighbors, of the priest, of the entire nation. There is a responsibility to teach these people about God and about the covenant, what it means to be in a covenant relationship with God. And so, this is an endeavor, I think, to bring the whole nation together and give everyone a responsibility where they teach them about God, about His miraculous wonders, about His mighty works, and to teach them about His character, about His mercy, about His loving kindness, and what it means to be in that covenant relationship with God. And so there'll be a lot of responsibility that will follow this as we go through. But this is something that starts at this point and will be followed even when we get to the days of Moses, when the law is instituted. They will continue to follow this path.
Abraham took it so seriously that when God told him this, not only did he do it, but he had everybody that was his servants, slaves, everybody that was in his whole control. Every man was.
Well, that's what he was told here. Verse 13, both he who was born in the house and who is bought with your money. So everyone in your household, it's your responsibility to do this. And the latter part of verse 13, he says, so shall my covenant be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. Again, we're using that term again, everlasting. And what did we say about that last class? What does that mean? Well, it can mean two different things just based upon the context. It can mean forever, or it can mean more of an age-lasting or indefinite period of time. So we don't know exactly at this point in time, but we'll see as we go that it will be for a specific period of time and not a forever statute that is commanded.
Yeah, so I think a lot of what you said is, really good. So it's like it affects everyone who's going to be part of the ones who come from Abraham, right? All of them, all the males have to participate in this. And it, like you said, happens at the very beginning of their life, right? So the idea is that when are they to be committed to God? It's like at the very beginning, like all the way through. And it's to continue, like you said, for an indefinite period of time. You see God place a really heavy emphasis on this, right? He even links it directly to the covenant. I mean, he says, like, the covenant I made with you. Like, this is how you know you're part of the covenant or not. The reason I say that is because, obviously, if it was emphasized as heavily, to you from birth, you probably would have some strong feelings about that, right? You mentioned that we'll see later this is an indefinite thing, right?
Right.
We know it's an indefinite thing and not an everlasting as far as eternal thing, because when we get to Acts 15, and you have Gentiles who are becoming Christians, right? And it's like, okay, what do we do to these people who are supposed to be committed to God now? And the Jews are saying, well, they need to be circumcised. Well, we can kind of understand why they thought that, because ever since this point, for hundreds of years, right? Thousands of years. But,
Thousands.
For a long, long, long time, and forever, their entire life, they've been told, this is what has to happen for me, part of God's people. So when you get to Acts 15, it makes sense for them to think, well, I guess these people need to be as well. But we see there that Paul says, no, that would ask more of them than just circumcision. That would be asking them to keep the whole old law, which is kind of interesting because the old law, as they would have known it, doesn't exist at this point.
Right.
But even in that passage, I guess they say the circumcision of Moses, not of Abraham.
Right.
But and one other thing I wanted to, I think, say about this. The ones who don't do this, right? So you have those who, the command is to do this, right? For everyone to do it, very beginning, keep this going all the way throughout. What happens if they don't? Right. And I think that goes, you're saying like the responsibility of everyone. It's the responsibility of everybody to make sure they know why they're doing it, to make sure it is done. But then also you have a responsibility where if it's not done, it's like you have to, separate from that person. Right, they're no longer part of the covenant people because they have broken the covenant. So again, this is a big deal, right? This is an important thing.
And this is this part right here shows how Abraham is the father of the Jews because of this covenant with the circumcision. But another way, Abraham's our father, it has nothing to do with this. It has to do with, well, first of all, the promises were made to him before all this happened. And also because he was a man of faith. That's why he's our father. So,
So it's not, you're talking about like, there's a fleshly nation, right? And then there's a spiritual nation.
He's our father because he was a man of faith, and so we're supposed to follow his example.
Right.
But it has nothing to do with this. Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add? You ready?
Yeah. You want me to just read the?
Mm-hmm.
How far do you want me to read?
However you want, wherever you want to go with it.
All right. I'm going to go through 15 through 21.
All right.
And God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her." Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, "Shall a child be born to a man who's 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." God said, "No, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son. You shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year." All right. So what we see here is you see a name change. We already had a name change for Abram. You have a name change now for Sarah. What's her name? Yeah, now it's Sarah, right? Well, I think what's interesting about this is you talked about like the meaning of Abram versus Abraham. I don't think the meaning changes for Sarai.
Not from
to
what
Sarah.
I understand.
It means princess both times. I think it's kind of interesting. Her name means princess. I think there's maybe a reason in the context that could mean that, but I think there's another reason it's kind of interesting. So what do you think, probably in context, why do you think her name may mean princess? Who comes from her? All these people. And specifically, he talks about there's a type of a station that comes from her.
There's rulers.
There are rulers.
From her bloodline.
Yes, kings of people, right? So you have kings of people that come from her. So maybe that's why she's referred to, in a term of, maybe her name means a term of royalty, right? It also is kind of interesting to me. I don't know if this is the intention at all, but it's just interesting that a while back when they were in Egypt, right? Who had interest in Sarai at that point? Yeah, king of Egypt, right? Pharaoh. And it's like, well, that's kind of it. I don't know if there's anything to that, but that's just a little interesting connection there. But either way, her name has changed. And again, I don't know how much to make of this, but the next thing we see Abraham say, he uses her new name, right? Or at least in the translation I'm reading. He doesn't say Sarai, he says Sarah. So he already, adopted or adapted to this new name. But let's talk about what the promise is overall, right? So he promises specifically that this nation is going to come through who? And we've been talking about it, but through who? Yeah, Sarah, right? And then Isaac, right? What we have here is the narrowing, right? So at first, Abram is told that there will be a great nation that comes from you. All right, does he know exactly how it's going to happen? No. And in fact, later on, he's like, look, I need clarification on this. Is it going to be, is it my own flesh and blood, or is it someone else that's going to inherit these things? And so God narrows it down a little bit. He says it's going to be from your own flesh and blood. But does he get many more details than that? No. And then here, and so, obviously you talked about this already, but with Hagar, they try to take things and matters into their own hands a little bit. Doesn't really work out. Here, God narrows it down even more. So who's the promise coming through? Sarah, right? And so you have this promise, and it's narrowing down every time. Pretty much every time it's reiterated. It's maybe not every time, but it's getting more and more narrow. What's Abraham's reaction to this?
He wants Ishmael to be he's like, that initially he's like, let Ishmael be the one.
That's right. I was thinking maybe his gut reaction to this.
He laughed.
Laugh.
He laughs, right? Yeah. So he laughs at this. All right. So I'm gonna ask this question. I'll ask it again here a little bit later, or maybe you will. It doesn't matter. Is it wrong to laugh at this? I don't know. Right? Does God rebuke him for laughing? No. Right?
I think he was more like astonished. Or,
Yes. I think this may be. So I think sometimes you use the term disbelief, not necessarily mean you literally don't believe it. We mean like you're in wonder over something, right? I wonder here if Abraham's not laughing because he's just in wonder over what God has just said. How is this going to work at this point, right? I mean, we're 13 years removed from when we were already questioning if this was going to happen through my flesh and blood. And now you're saying it's going to be through Sarah. It's like, how's that going to
Yeah,
work?
it's almost as if he's saying this is too marvelous to,
Yes, right.
you know.
Yeah. And so he's like, I don't understand. And then what does he try to maybe convince God of? Let it be Ishmael, right? So it's like, don't worry about that. Let it be Ishmael. All right. That seems kind of interesting to me. Why do you think he would do that?
he loves him.
Yeah, he loves him, right?
Mhm.
I mean, Ishmael's his son. Again, like we're going to see here in a little bit, he's had 13 years with Ishmael. I think he wants to make sure Ishmael's taken care of, right? He doesn't want to just have another son and then Ishmael be completely forgotten about. He wants to make sure Ishmael's taken care of. What's the first thing God says in response to this?
I have blessed
Okay. Yes.
and I will make
Maybe even before that.
So Sarah's going to be the one.
All right. Yeah. He says no. Right? So Abraham's like, what about Ishmael? Can it be through Ishmael? He goes, no. He's like, it's going to be through Sarah. You're going to have a son. You're going to name him Isaac. That's who my covenant's going to be through. But does he forget about Ishmael? No. It's not just a rejection completely and saying, no, you just forget him. It says, I will bless him. That's what you were saying. So he was worried about Ishmael being forgotten. Ishmael won't be forgotten, right? God will bless him. Are the blessings going to be the same?
No.
No. In some ways, they're similar, right? Are they both going to have nations come from them? Yes, right? And that's something. But what's the main difference?
God is established
Yes.
through Isaac,
Yes.
not
That's right. God's people are coming through Isaac. That's exactly right. The covenant is through Isaac, not Ishmael, right? And
also, through that covenant, it goes back to Adam and Eve. That Christ is actually going to be through Abraham's descendants, is how God's going to actually bruise Satan's head through Christ and be our salvation and Savior of the world. But it ain't going to be through Ishmael, it's going to be through Isaac.
yeah, so you're talking about like that path that we've already been following. Now we see the next link in the chain, right? Like this is where it's going. The last thing I'll mention before you can say whatever y'all want is the last verse we read. So verse 21, I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. And I just want to point out that phrase because now not only do we know it's going to be Sarah, right? We have a time frame, right? So he's giving Abraham something even more to grasp onto, right? He knows it's going to be through Sarah. He knows what he's going to call his son, and he knows when it's going to happen. Also, this phrase is going to pop up again later, and that may give us, some hints on some things later. But I just want to point that phrase out.
Very good. Anything anyone like to add?
I think one other thing that God's actually showing Abraham and Sarah and all of God's people, if this had happened 13 years ago, they would have said, he's still able to have a child, and Sarah is too. But since 13 more years and they've got further up in age, this would have to be from God for this even to happen in both of them, to have a child. And this way, God shows him, I'm the one, I'm the reason that you need to look to me is I'm going to bless you, but you need to trust me to the point that I'm going to do what I've told you that I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
promises.
Yeah. So you're saying like God's requiring faith. You're saying like I'm the one in control. Trust in me.
And oftentimes we go through this and just right here I said he promised Ishmael 12 princes or 12 princes that shall be a great nation, just like there was 12 tribes.
Yep.
Don't know why I hadn't noticed that before, but
Yeah, it's
So
interesting.
if there wasn't enough similarities, it,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
really does
That's right.
connect there. And so his descendants become the Arabian people. And so that's just food for thought. There'll be Arabs, which, from what I understand, means nomads, and they'll descend there in the Arabian desert. But we'll see as time progresses that as God had already foretold, they're always going to be a troubled people, a violent people. They're always going to, have their arm against their neighbor. So not only will Ishmael follow that trait, but his descendants after him. All right, well, we need to move along. Let's pick up in verse 22. When he had finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son and all those born in his house, or bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house. And he circumcised the flesh of their foreskins that very day, as God had said to him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. That very day, Abraham and his son Ishmael was circumcised, and all the men of his house, those born in the house and those bought with the money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. So 99 years old and entering, and that's hard to imagine even in this modern era. But you think about in that day with the tooling being a lot more primitive. I worked with a man years ago. This was probably back in the early 90s, and I think he was in his mid to upper 40s, and he had some trouble and whatnot because he'd never been circumcised. So he told me, he said, they should have just killed me on the table. Because it was rough. I mean, it was rough, and that was a long recovery time for him. So you think about, here's a man that's 99 years old, and how many from his household will be, older in age. So this, you talking about when it says that Abraham was a man of faith, this is one of those traits that we forget about many times, but we shouldn't, because this truly took an act of faith to carry this out, because this was a pretty big deal.
No.
I
I don't think so.
no.
And they wouldn't be able to defend themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So
That's part of the trust too.
Right.
right, they wouldn't be able to defend themselves, and it's possible they have enemies because when
Sure.
they went to go get Lot, I mean, you may make some enemies, or people will be jealous of what Abraham has and want it. And the men probably couldn't work for a while, right? And so
Sure.
there's a lot that's stalling all this time. Like it takes a great amount of faith. But what's amazing here is that he does it immediately, right?
Yeah, no hesitation.
Right. And I think that gives us a good idea of what faith is, right? It's you immediately do what you can to serve God, right? If God's called you or commanded you to do something, you do it. And you do it completely, right? So it's, not just he and Ishmael. It's like, well, this is my immediate family. It's everybody in his household. And he goes through and does all of it immediately. But I think I think Karen talked about this a while back, gives us another facet to Abraham and his leadership, and it shows the kind of leader he was. Because is it recorded that there's this great pushback on this from the people in his household? No. Now, I don't know if there was or not. Right? I don't know if some people are like, "Are we sure about this?" I'm not sure. But
can we talk about this?
Yeah, can we talk about this? But regardless, it happened that day. Right, and they trusted, they had faith in Abraham and in the Lord. Just shows you the kind of leader he was, a leader in faith. And it's just interesting.
Anything else? Okay.
All right, so let's just, start with chapter 18. Let's see. I'm going to go through verse 8. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, Do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent and said to Sarah, went to Sarah and said, Quick, 3 seahs of flour or fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So who comes to Abraham in this? The Lord, right? Now, that's pretty interesting, right? At this point, what does Abraham see at this point? 3 men, right? I don't think he knows it's the Lord, right? I don't think he knows these 2 others that are with him are angels. But what is his attitude still? He's a servant. That's right. And what I like about this is that, we were talking about he's a man of high station, right? He's got a lot of people that he's in control of. I mean, like, he's a big fish, right? Does that keep him from wanting to be a servant? No. Does that keep him from wanting to do what he can to make these people comfortable, right? People he doesn't know, right? Now, he's the head honcho where he's at, but he still wants to make sure they're comfortable, right? And you see that he's the one rushing to go make sure these things get done, right? He runs to Sarah. He runs to his herd to get the calf. He's going to do these things very quickly. That's interesting to me. Also, maybe there are a couple other things that are noteworthy on this. What does he verbally offer? Let's just say in way of food. Yeah, just in way of food. Like, what type of food does he offer? Bread. All right, but what does he bring them? He brings more than that, right? He brings bread, right? He has Sarah prepare that, but then he also brings curds. He kills a young fat calf. He kills it, right? So he goes above and beyond what he even said he was going to do. So you see this servant mentality, this zeal to be helpful to others. What does he do while they eat?
Stands there.
He stands there. All right. Well, who would do that? Again, a servant, right? So he offers high quality stuff. He takes time out of his schedule, even though he has servants that could do these things. And you see he does delegate some stuff, but he's making sure the stuff gets done. And then he stands there as a servant, making sure that they're able to enjoy the things he's given them. Say what? He leads by example. So that's exactly right. So we're talking about, like, okay, well, why would these men follow Abraham the way he is? Probably because this is the kind of man he is, right? Yep. He's the kind of man that is a servant. He is a leader, but he's a servant. And that inspires loyalty and faith in a person.
I'll prepare all this. And we later find out that it was angels. But when you first read it, it's just 3 men. I mean, right. How many of us are going to invite 3 men? So.
Yeah, that's right.
I've got a footnote here that says this was 21 quarts of flour. Not only that, but a calf. Mm-hmm. This is only 3 men. So, I mean, it's not like Abraham is being stingy or selfish here or anything. I mean, he's offering over, above and beyond the call. I mean, he's offering them a feast here. Yeah. He's offering quite a bit to these.
It's not scraps.
Yeah, so he's quite a host.
Yeah.
Anything y'all would like to add to that?
It says, wash your feet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Rest.
Yeah.
And you rest while I go prepare. I'm sorry, if you come to my house, that probably will not happen. Yeah. I definitely know the food part won't happen.
Yeah.
But But this should be our example.
Yeah.
Open to people that we don't know.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that is that servant role as far as, washing the feet. So, yeah, quite a hostess. But as we move on in verse 9, it says, they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she's in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. He said, no, but you did laugh. And so you have this occasion. And I wonder if, in chapter 17, did Abraham not share that with Sarah? That information that, this is what's going to happen a year from now, because this is a pretty quick occurrence to follow up behind that. And the same thing is said, and now what's her response? She laughs. But, what is different in this laugh compared to Abraham's laugh? Absolutely. There was doubt in her mind. How can this be? I'm too old. Even my Lord is too old, even, for his part of this role. We're both too old and advanced in years. This is impossible. But what does the Lord say?
Nothing.
Is anything too hard for the Lord? I want to make a point here. God's names that's been revealed to man up to this point. Early on, we saw Elohim, God the Creator, emphasizing his strength. Then we saw Yahweh. We're familiar with Yahweh, which emphasizing the manifested one. We saw Melchizedek use the term God Most High, emphasizing his preeminence. You remember Hagar? What did she call God? Yeah, El Roi, the God who sees. And in chapter 17, we saw God Almighty, or El Shaddai, which speaks of himself as God Almighty, emphasizing he's strong enough to overcome. And I think this is a good place to emphasize that, because here, what he is saying is impossible. But is this impossible for who? It's not impossible for God. Maybe on typical terms, this would seem impossible, but for God, nothing is impossible. And so, yeah, Sarah is rebuked here, basically, for her laughter, for her doubt. And we're going to see that a year from now, this is going to play out just as he has foretold. But it is interesting that, Abraham laughed, but he was not rebuked. Here, Sarah laughs, and she is. So there's an obvious difference in the laughter. I don't know if Abraham's was more of a joyous laugh, but we know that Sarah's was one of doubt. And so that's something to keep in mind moving forward. You got anything?
Maybe the only thing I'd say here is I think this should be probably where Abraham realizes who he's dealing with. Mm-hmm. So, I made mention of in verse 21, chapter 17, Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. And what does this man, one of the three, say? He says the same thing that the Lord told him, right? And if he hasn't told Sarah, I don't know who else he has told, right? So how would this man have knowledge of this? Well, he's either from God or he is God, right?
Right.
And yeah, I think we'll see later even more hints of this is God, right? Or for Abraham.
Mm-hmm. Anything anyone would like to add? You want to try to get through 21 at least?
Yep, we can do it.
Okay.
Kind of. All right. So verse 16. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom, And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised. Then the Lord said, Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. All right. So what you have here is they're setting out, the men are setting out, is Abraham just like, okay, see ya. He goes with them, right? So again, the idea that he's being a good host, he's being a servant, right? He's going with them. And at this point, maybe he knows who he's dealing with, and so he wants to stay with them. It seems here the Lord is almost wondering out loud, but also introducing this idea of telling Abraham what he's about to do next, right? What he wants to do next. What does the Lord want to do next? Yes. He wants to, and we'll even say he wants to evaluate, right? He wants to evaluate to see if Sodom and Gomorrah are what he's been hearing, right? Which is interesting because he's been hearing about this. So what does that tell us, that the Lord's been hearing about this? Yeah, that means that people are pleading to him about what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So it's not good stuff. And in fact, the implications are that they're going to be destroyed. So it's that bad, right? It's bad enough to where there will be destruction that comes from this. What else you want to say about it?
Yeah, and to narrow it down, I mean, as the story plays out, it seems that the prayers that's coming up to God must be coming from one house,
Yeah.
from one singular location, because the abundance of the wicked is pretty broad.
It could be those passing through as well, though, because
Could
of what
be.
we see from those who pass through
That
in
could
this
be.
story.
That could be.
19 shows us why God chose Abraham too.
Very good.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, Abraham was a chosen vessel, because how would he instruct his children and the descendants after him? He would instruct them in the way of the Lord. He was that seed that God chose to start this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, good comment, good thought. Well, I think that's going to wind us up for tonight. We certainly had intentions of, look at there, we may have talked more than Larson would have.
I managed to slow it down.
Well, my lengthy review probably didn't help things, but Lord willing, Wednesday night we'll pick up in chapter 18, verse 22.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.